the London area late in the afternoon. 13 to 19 degrees the temperatures, and then that thicker cloud with the odd spot of drizzle continuing to work eastwards through the evening. But for most, it is going to be a dry day. As the week wears on, this area of high pressure that's been with us for a little while relinquishes its grip, allowing a frontal system to push in from the west. It'll be quite a slow feature. It'll take its time, but it does increase the likelihood that we'll see some outbreaks of rain through the second half of the week. But after a weekend that's been quite chilly by day and also by night, the temperatures are a little higher than they have been. But for tomorrow, dry for most, if rather cloudy. Rita.
Thank you, Ben. Well, that's all from us for now. I'll be back just after 10 this evening. There'll be full coverage of the UK National Moment of Silence here on BBC One at 8 p.m. In the meantime, it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night. Thank you for watching.
Tonight on Reporting Scotland, preparations for events ahead of the Queen's state funeral tomorrow. A minute's silence will be held at 8 o'clock tonight, and there'll be events across the country, including in Braemar and at the Kelpies.
We will light 96 lanterns, one for every year of her life, taking a moment to reflect and remember our Queen.
At the end of a momentous week, we'll look back on the events in Scotland from Balmoral to Edinburgh.
The Queen stood beside me as enthusiastic as a young child would be, knowing that her ponies were coming off the ramp.
And we'll hear from people who met the Queen through her charity work. After 10 days of ceremony, tributes and mourning, final preparations are being made for the Queen's funeral in London tomorrow. Big Ben will strike at 8 o'clock tonight to mark a national moment of reflection for Her Majesty. Her funeral, the largest state occasion in living memory for many, will be viewed around the world. Hundreds of members of the armed forces in Scotland will play a part, as they did as Her Majesty's coffin made the journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh. Maura Kinneborough reports now as Scots prepare to say goodbye to the Queen.
In central Scotland, under the giant Kelpies, an outdoor service is planned for 7:30 this evening. The world's largest equine statues overlook Queen Elizabeth's canal.
In 2017, she visited the canal to open the Queen Elizabeth II Canal. So it's a tribute to her tonight, where we will light 96 lanterns, one for every year of her life, taking a moment to reflect and remember our Queen.
A giant screen's being set up behind the palace in Edinburgh's Holyrood Park. Thousands of locals and visitors are expected here and at other viewing locations around the country.
Many schools, shops and services will shut for the Queen's funeral tomorrow, but some community and religious centres, cinemas and veterans clubs will open free for the public, so people don't have to watch the service on their own.
It's 1 week since the Queen's coffin was driven from Aberdeenshire through much of east central Scotland. Thousands of people in Edinburgh came to witness these extraordinary events. Some of those involved will represent Scotland at her funeral tomorrow.
It's an absolute honour for me as leader of the city to be able to take part in, I think, what's quite a historic moment for the world. And myself and the Lord Provost, as the Lord Lieutenant to the Queen, will travel down to the funeral to show our final respects and represent our capital city where the Queen enjoyed so much of her time.
This evening events will happen around Scotland from Glasgow to Braemar, Dornoch and Portree, ahead of a national minute's silence at 8 o'clock. Maura Kinneborough reporting Scotland, Falkirk.
Well, the Queen's lifelong love of her home at Balmoral and the surrounding area were well documented. Our reporter Rachel Bell is in Braemar on Royal Deeside, where they'll be holding a ceremony at the moment of reflection this evening. Rachel, what's planned there?
Well, this tiny village in the heart of the Cairngorms has really strong connections to the royal family. Only 8 miles along the road is Balmoral Castle, where the Queen spent many, many happy summers and where only last week she peacefully passed away. Well, tonight, right here, members of the community will come together to remember her. Delighted to say I've been joined now by local resident Colin Hunter, who has organised tonight's gathering. Colin, just talk me through what's going to happen tonight and why you wanted to do it this way.
Well, it'll be a short, informal event. We'll have a piper who'll be playing, and he'll be playing for about 10 minutes, but his last slow air will be the slow air, the Flowers of the Forest. It was played at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, so very poignant to have that. We'll then, of course, observe the minute's silence, and then we'll have the national anthem, God Save the King.
And why did you want to do it this way here?
Well, this evening, I think people will be in different camps. Some people won't observe the silence at all. Some people will want to be at home or be with family. But with the community connection here to Her Majesty, we thought it important to offer the opportunity for those in the community to join together to remember her.
And you talked about that connection. It is very strong here, helped along by the fact that the Queen attended the Braemar gathering so often throughout her reign. How do you think this community has responded to the events of the last few days? And also, how do you think she will be remembered here?
Well, Rachel, I think they've responded as most people in the country have, with sadness, with some tears, but also with very fond memories and a great appreciation for what she's done for our country over the last 70 years. She'll be particularly remembered, I think, for her attendance at the Braemar gathering. She's attended that for almost 90 years as a child, as a teenager, and throughout her life. And there are some wonderful pictures of her during her lifetime at the gathering, and I think that's the picture that people will have. We also, of course, have informal connections with the Queen. Many have met her, many have worked for her at Balmoral, so they have very special memories.
Colin, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Well, a similar event to the one being held here in Braemar will also be held in Ballater, another community with strong links to the royal family, and they'll be joining communities up and down the country this evening who are coming together to remember the Queen before she is finally laid to rest.
Rachel Bell in Braemar, thank you. Tomorrow's state funeral in Westminster Abbey marks the culmination of 10 days of official mourning, which began in Scotland as soon as the late Queen's death was announced. Our correspondent David Cowan reports now on the end of a momentous reign.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
It's been said that the Queen had wanted to die in Scotland. If that's true, her wish was granted, and it meant that for 6 days the world's eyes fell on the northern nation in her kingdom. Her death had been announced within hours of her children rushing to Balmoral. At her official residence in Scotland, the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, people queued to read the words for themselves.
70 years, amazing service. What can you say?
I've always loved her and followed her, and I'm very sad today. But she's with Philip, and she's in heaven.
Into action swung Operation Unicorn, the plan approved by the Queen for what would happen if she died north of the border. Guns fired from Edinburgh Castle 96 times to mark each year of her life. Bells rang out from churches around the land.
I came down here to ring the bell. I'm ex-forces. I was breaking my heart.
It says a great deal that the death of a 96-year-old woman was a shock, but hers was the longest reign in British history. Most people have never known another monarch. You're one of the first people today to bring flowers down to Holyrood Palace. Can I ask you why?
Respect. Respect for someone that's been around all my life, all my mum and dad's life.
We just had a little 1 minute and we just closed our eyes and we just thought about the Queen.
Her death brought to an end one chapter in the country's story. The start of another was proclaimed at a ceremony in Scotland's capital.
Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign, happy of memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
For the last time, the Queen left the sanctuary of her Highland estate. Thousands lined the route as the cortege made its way south from Balmoral, past tributes which would have brought a smile from the women who loved horses and the countryside.
I just wanted to be back at the same spot where I'd waved to her 69 years ago.
I think it was important to come along today and just say one final farewell.
It's a brief glimpse of a huge moment of history.
The 175-mile route took her through Aberdeenshire into Tayside and Fife. Then, after almost 6 hours, Edinburgh and the palace at the foot of the Royal Mile. It was a remarkable exercise carried out flawlessly and watched around the world. The following day, for the first time in 70 years, a new monarch received the keys to the city of Edinburgh. What happened next will never be forgotten by those who witnessed it. The Queen was taken to St Giles Cathedral with her son, his sister and 2 brothers walking behind. At one point, a protester shouted at Prince Andrew, but the rest of their slow march towards Edinburgh's High Kirk was accompanied by near silence. Huge crowds had crammed the Old Town's narrow pavements. At St Giles, the service of thanksgiving reflected the Queen's deeply held Christian faith.
For the life and example of our Queen.
With all our hearts, we give you thanks.
Today we mourn her passing, but we also celebrate the long and happy reign that we experienced with her.
At the Scottish Parliament, the First Minister tabled a motion of condolence.
Queen Elizabeth, Queen of Scots, we are grateful for her life. May she now rest in peace.
The Queen, like so many generations of our family before her, found in the hills of this land and in the hearts of its people a haven and a home.
That evening, in St Giles, her children stood vigil as she lay at rest.
Just grief-stricken, you could just see that in their faces, but it was a very dignified moment, and they did her proud.
Over the next 24 hours, 33,000 people filed past the coffin.
It's never ever going to happen probably again. I'll be able to experience something as memorable and as special as that.
It's just everybody's granny, isn't she? She's a nation's granny. It just means so much to everybody. And, oh, it's terrible.
Highest respect for her dignity and for her humility, like she served the nation, and I said she's got a great. She's had a great way of including everybody.
And just hope her son can do 3/4 as good a job as she's done.
It would be foolish to claim that everyone in Scotland shared such feelings. There were dissenting voices.
Yeah, I personally don't believe in having an unelected head of state.
6 days after her long life came to an end, the Queen left Scotland for the last time.
For all the time that she has been in Scotland over the years and her love for Scotland, I hope that we did a good job for her.
Elizabeth had been Scotland's most Scottish monarch in centuries, but the time had come to say farewell.
Well, after those thousands of people in Scotland lined up to pay their respects to the Queen at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh last week, hundreds of thousands have done the same as she lies in state in London. Her funeral starts at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, and up to millions of people are expected to visit the areas around the royal palaces for the occasion. One of them will be our correspondent, David Porter. David, this looks set to be a very busy day in London.
It's busy, Laura, already, and it is going to get very much busier in the next few hours as the state funeral takes place tomorrow for the late Queen Elizabeth, which will be the culmination of a week or so of commemorative events, probably the like of which and the scale of which people have not seen before. This is going to be the first state funeral in Britain for more than 55 years. The last one was Winston Churchill. You will have dignitaries coming from many places. It has been described by one diplomat as rolling 100 state visits into one day. As you can see behind me, the crowds are still gathering. We've got a walking crowd now walking. They are nearly at the point where they will be able to get into the Palace of Westminster to pay their respects to the late Queen. Authorities say that at some point this evening they will shut the queue so they can make sure that everyone who is presently in the queue can actually get to pay their respects when it shuts at 6:30 tomorrow morning, just a few hours before the funeral takes place.
And David, already a lot of international leaders have arrived.
Yeah, the funeral isn't till tomorrow morning, but over the weekend, scores and scores of international dignitaries have been coming. Kings, queens, presidents, heads of government, heads of state, and dignitaries from all over the world. It's estimated that something like 500 dignitaries have arrived already. It is going to be a who's who of world diplomacy. People in Scotland as well will be represented by the First Minister and other senior figures. And within the last hour, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his wife, Jill Biden, have been into Westminster Hall to personally view the lying in state and pay their tributes to the Queen. They will also sign a book of condolence at Lancaster House a little bit later on. This evening there will be a reception at Buckingham Palace held by King Charles for those foreign dignitaries, for those who will be at the funeral tomorrow. It will be a chance literally for political leaders from around the world to get together before the events of tomorrow.
OK, David Porter in London for us this evening. Thank you. Let's have a look at some of the rest of the day's news now. A 22-year-old man's been arrested in connection with the death of a woman in Aberdeen. The unnamed woman's body was discovered on a roundabout near the Marriott Hotel at Stonywood Road and Victoria Street around 3:30 yesterday morning. Police Scotland confirmed they were treating the death as suspicious. Rail services on the nearby Inverness to Aberdeen line were closed for a period but have since resumed. Police have named a 73-year-old woman who died following a crash on the A9 on Friday. Philippa Grant from Rothiemurchus near Aviemore died after the collision at the Slough Summit south of Inverness. Meanwhile, a woman from Canada died in hospital 10 days after another crash in the Highlands. Police named 72-year-old Donna Engelbert as the second fatality from the collision on the A832 at Dundonald on the 31st of August. A man aged 69 died and 3 other people were injured in the 2-car crash. Football champions Celtic remain at the top of the Scottish Premiership despite being beaten by St Mirren in Paisley today. The visitors went down 2-0, their first league defeat in 364 days. In the day's other match, Hearts moved into 3rd place after beating Motherwell 3-0 at Fir Park. Let's go back to our main story now on this. The eve of the Queen's funeral. As a former Deputy First Minister and moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, Lord Wallace of Tankerness had reason to meet the Queen on several occasions. He's been sharing his memories of those encounters with our reporter David Dildy.
It's been an extraordinary period of time, and I think what we have seen is a tremendous outpouring, not just of grief, but also I think of thanksgiving. That we have been truly blessed to have had a monarch who reigned for so long and fulfilled her duty literally almost up until the last day, and give an example of service, of selfless and dedicated service, which I think is something which we all can take a lesson from, particularly all of us in public life. I first met her in Kirkwall in Orkney in 1987. The cathedral, St Magnus Cathedral, was celebrating the 850th anniversary of its foundation, and it's something which she recalled, that visit to St Magnus Cathedral, when the last time I met her, which was just 3 weeks before she died.
Now, you of course were in the company of the Queen quite recently, last month. In fact, you were up preaching at Crathie, not for the Queen, but by her invitation. You were at Balmoral. Tell us about that.
the Queen very graciously invited me to spend 2 days at Balmoral Castle, and it was a remarkable occasion. I mean, obviously, I think understandably, you've got a degree of trepidation about going to spend 2 nights with the royal family. But you know, the Queen was just so warm. It was a real privilege to be able to have quality time to talk to her, and it's something which I will always cherish. Carathie Kirk, you know, there's a lot of simplicity compared to Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral, even indeed for that matter St Magnus Cathedral. I think the Queen, you know, felt that she could worship there. The Queen had a very profound and devout faith, and I suspect that she liked the relative simplicity of it.
Now, you met with the Queen on several occasions. Tell us something that stands out from one of those.
Oh, I have a number of memories. When I was Deputy First Minister, during the Queen's Golden Jubilee in 2002, I was the Minister in attendance, walking 10 paces behind. You just saw, it was a good vantage point to see how she engaged with people in the crowds that were there, and just what joy she brought by actually being in a place and people turning out in huge numbers to welcome her. And you know, as I passed by, as it was 10 feet behind or whatever, you know, there were smiles on everyone's faces, and they weren't for me, but they were for the Queen that had just passed. Yeah.
Lord Jim Wallace there talking to David Deldie. Now, the Queen fulfilled many roles throughout her long reign, including being patron of a large number and range of charities. As Aileen Clark has been finding out, she took a huge interest in the work of those she was involved with, and that enthusiasm was warmly welcomed by the charities who had her patronage.
Britain's royal family have always been genuine lovers of horses, and it's clear that Prince Charles and Princess Anne will be.
For the Queen, there was a particular tradition she was keen to keep up.
The Queen loved Highland ponies, even having her own stud here on the Balmoral estate.
Sylvia Ormiston runs that stud and also heads up the Highland Pony Society. The Queen was their patron, bringing her immense knowledge and passion for this rare working breed, evident on the day the ponies from her other estates were brought to join those at Balmoral.
The Queen stood beside me as enthusiastic as a young child would be, knowing that her ponies were coming off the ramp. And as the ramp opened and the back door opened, there was a little grey pony that could have been any little grey pony. And actually, before the mare even got to the bottom of the ramp with her foal, the Queen had told me who she was, how she was bred and how the foal was bred. Now that shows you the passion that the Queen had for her Highland pony breedings.
Over the years, the Balmoral Highland ponies have picked up a rosette or two at the Royal Highland Show. The Queen was patron of the charity which puts on the show and was an enthusiastic visitor with interests well beyond the equine. That became very clear to this champion Limousin cattle breeder when he escorted her round.
We went round the cattle lines with some of the prize winners out in the paddock, and she presented some of the prizes there. She asked a lot of pertinent questions, and I myself was gently but very firmly chided for breeding Limousin cattle, which are a French import, rather than some of the traditional British breeds. So I was put in my place.
The Royal Scottish Country Dance Society also enjoyed the Queen's patronage for decades. For the Diamond Jubilee, they created some new dances. John Wilkinson talked her through them and recalls that the Queen seemed keen to give one in particular a go.
When it came to the third dance, which is the Castle of May, she said, "Oh, I think I could do that. What is the dance?" So I explained it was for her mother at the Castle of May. And I said, "And I'm sure you could do the dance, ma'am, because I know you're a dancer."
These dances that you do quite a bit.
She just kept saying it, and that was the last thing she said to us as she left. And then her piper a few minutes later came back and said, "She's still talking about doing that dance. I'm going to have to learn the tune."
From very early in her reign, the Queen made a point of visiting former servicemen and women, as at this special housing project in Paisley for those injured during the Second World War. She was a patron of a number of veterans' charities, including Veterans Housing Scotland, who have these homes today in Edinburgh.
He's landed
Resident here, Davy Adamson, remembers meeting the Queen when he was just a young soldier with the 1st Battalion Royal Highland Fusiliers. They were doing the Royal Guard at Balmoral when on the night of the Gillies Ball, he was the soldier invited to dance with her.
Well, I had just done my first active tour of duty, and that had been scary enough. This was far more petrifying, especially when I realised that nobody was moving until I had went up and asked her for a pleasure. Put my left arm up and I was shaking. So when she put her hand, obviously she felt the shaking. And she went, "Are you all right?" I went, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Do you know the dance?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She went, "Well, just relax and take me onto the floor." So I took her onto the floor. It didn't stop me shaking, even though she's saying you'll be fine. Just remember your steps, remember what you're doing, and enjoy yourself. We done the dance and took her off, thank her for the pleasure. And she went, "Well done, go and enjoy yourself."
And did you?
Oh, straight to the bar, so I couldn't get asked again.
David Adamson there talking to Aileen Clark. Now, let's take a look at the weather with Judith.
Good evening. Well, Shetland enjoying some glorious sunshine today, and in fact Shetland on a winning streak over the next couple of days with lots of dry weather and lighter winds as well. Elsewhere there was a fair bit of cloud, but it was a nice quiet day of weather. We still have high pressure there or thereabouts over the next couple of days. It starts to shift its axis to the south of the border, allowing some weather fronts to bring more in the way of cloud, changing the character of the high altogether. So cloudier conditions, but much milder conditions. We lose that harsh northerly we've been seeing of late. Into this evening, we'll see clear spells across the northeast, Caithness and the Northern Isles, predominantly dry elsewhere. A bit more in the way of cloud further south and west. That cloud thick enough to produce a few spots of rain over the southwest. Light winds still on the cold side under those clear skies in the north. That'll be the last cold night for a while, but in the west it's still mild, 9 or 10 Celsius. So tomorrow a largely dry start with some good sunny spells for eastern and northern Scotland. Thicker cloud in the west bringing a few spots of rain, and that cloud will start to increase as we head through the day. However, the Northern Isles seeing plenty of dry weather with brighter sunny spells. The wind's still coming in from the north, but there'll be light, but there'll be a cool feel here. And some sunshine too for Caithness, for northern parts of Aberdeenshire. Elsewhere, we pick up more in the way of cloud. It'll be bright rather than sunny through the rest of eastern Scotland, and those temperatures 17, 18 Celsius. We might see a wee bit of shelter of Northern Ireland, meaning some brightness for Galloway, Kintyre, but thicker cloud running up the west coast, bringing some bits and pieces of rain into Tiree, Skye and the Western Isles as well. But on the whole, winds will be on the light side, a bit more of a breeze out towards the Outer Hebrides. Tomorrow evening, still some patchy rain in the west, but drier elsewhere. A wee bit of rain moving into the north during the overnight period. That will be with us on Tuesday morning. Some outbreaks of rain across northern Scotland. Elsewhere, it's cloudy, mainly dry. The best of any brightness up towards the northeast, and something brighter coming into southwest Scotland later in the day. Temperature-wise, look at 17, 18 Celsius, so very much on the mild side. Even further north, those temperatures will start to rise a couple of degrees as well, so feeling much less cold than of late. That's your forecast.
Following her accession at the age of just 25, Queen Elizabeth made her first public appearance here in Scotland at the Braemar Games in early September 1952. To the exact month, 70 years later, on a beautiful early autumn evening, the Queen left Scotland for the last time. We'll leave you with some pictures from an extraordinary few days. From all of us here, goodbye.
Can I me pass ach madam bio is ich my brunye ram smach ich dir mi ach gepass hatu ke hadish mi. O forste go gu farshingre getan a yora kesh is rachmora san nashtech Jehovah molly Shatar zje rędzie czyściach na dnie
Countryfile takes us to the Windsor estate next on BBC One Scotland to appreciate the Queen's passion for the countryside. And then at 7, the eve of the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Travelling the length